Um, I would like to thank Dr. Saida Hamid and all the other organizers for inviting me to talk at this colloquium in honor of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. It is a great honor to talk on this occasion on reflections, research, and reason, taking Maulana Azad's vision forward. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was India's first and longest standing education minister from 1947 to 1958, and was partly instrumental in establishing the educational foundations of post-independent India. In preparing this talk, I was trying to imagine what Maulana Azad would have said were India's greatest post-independence educational achievements and what were some of its failings. And I would imagine that he would have been very glad of the great increase in literacy rates, the extraordinary expansion of schools and colleges and enrollment of students, especially in rural India. But I think that he would have been equally glad that in 2009, we passed the RTE Act, okay, which asked the state to fulfill its duty towards implementing the rights of every citizen to an education, which would improve their knowledge, acquisition of knowledge, and self-betterment. I'm quoting Maulana Azad's words in 1953, when he said that the state had a duty towards implementing the rights of every citizen to an education which would improve their acquisition of knowledge and self-betterment. And I'm glad to know that in our audience, we have speakers who were very instrumental in ensuring that the RTE bill was passed in 2009. But Maulana Azad would have been equally saddened by the extraordinary degree of educational inequality and lack of educational participation in our school system, partly based on, which is highly segregated, partly based on the ability to pay. But he would have been particularly saddened by the educational status of Indian Muslims, which have declined from 1935, where it was far ahead of nearly all educational disadvantaged groups, to being at the bottom of the education ladder, being the most underrepresented group in school and higher education, and even lower than scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, which are the traditionally disadvantaged groups. Indian Muslims are now the most socially and politically marginalized groups, and in the recent decades have also become, their economic position has deteriorated, and they have become also the most impoverished. There is now a research and both a national and international consensus on research that a transformational education is the key to sustainable and significant improvement of impoverished communities. So what can one implement? In implementing Maulana Azad's vision that the state is obligated to provide every citizen with an education that improves their acquisition of knowledge and self-betterment, one needs to ask the question, what is the question what does one implement? That is the fundamental question. And then I'm reminded of Gertrude Stein's apocryphal answer, which on her deathbed, many admirers beseeched Gertrude Stein and said, Gertrude, what is the answer? To which Gertrude Stein is supposed to have said, in that case, what is the question? So before I address what is the question, I need to just focus on three issues which we need to discuss. First, it is probably not so well known that Muslims have the highest rates of stunting among the highest rates of stunting, along with scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, of children under 5 years. And stunting has considerable consequences on learning later on cognitive development, academic performance. And the work now shows that it even has an impact on adult life and specifically adult earnings. As I mentioned, Muslims are also the most educationally backward in school education. And most Muslims drop out before or after class 8, and even those who complete class 10 have very limited functional literacy, numeracy, and other skills which will help them to cope with adult life. And so early childhood development affects schooling, and schooling affects the knowledge and life chances of youth outside schools and colleges. And moreover, the parenting knowledge and behavior of married youth under 25 years have a profound impact on the development of their infants and school-going age children. So we have three very important related questions, and they're all intrinsically related to one another. And so when we talk of educational transformation, we cannot, as we normally do, focus specifically on education, formal education in schools and colleges. So the three important questions are, what should be done for Muslim infants in between birth to 3 age in relationship to nutrition, health, and all-round development? The second is, what needs to be provided for Muslim children to get 15 years of quality school education, which is the principal goal of the 2020 National Education Policy? And finally, what needs to be done for Muslim youth outside schools and colleges? For this group is actually larger than the Muslim youth enrolled in schools and colleges. I'm talking about the Muslim youth under 25 years. They have limited education and skills and need a variety of vocational and educational opportunities to enable them to be economically better off, more educated and knowledgeable citizens, and have and more informed married couples and parents. So in addition to these questions dealing with infants, school children, and youth under 25 years outside school, which group of Muslims should we focus on? It is my contention that we should focus on the disadvantaged group of Muslims, for unless we prioritize this group, and the Indian experience and the world experience is that untargeted schemes benefit mostly middle class and wealthier and more powerful groups. And Muslims will be no exception if we talk about Muslims as a whole rather than disadvantaged Muslims. However, given that these three groups of Muslims under 25 years total about approximately 18 million, in India, these figures are mind-boggling. 80 million Muslims under 25 years is larger than the population of France. We need to understand that only government at all levels, central, state, and sub-state levels, have the human and financial resources, institutional capacity, and organizational capacity, the responsibility and legitimacy to play the principal role in transforming the education of disadvantaged Muslims. However, all of us, civil society, what is now in the new education policy called non-state actors, have a crucial role. To understand the dimensions of what this is, it is important to understand the very different impact that social and cultural capital has on the lives of wealthier Muslims, or wealthier anybody, in fact, and poorer Muslims. Children from wealthier families have an abundance of social and cultural capital because they have educated parents, books, computers, friends who are educated, and they have tutoring, coaching, and career guidance, which eventually leads on to admission into prestigious institutions and prestigious jobs. Poor Muslims, on the other hand, have very limited social and cultural capital, live in cramped accommodation, have limited income to meet, parents have limited income to meet the requirements for nutrition, health, and all-round development. And they send their children normally to government regional medium schools or low-cost budget English medium schools. In these schools, their standards of teaching are low, and parents do not have the capacity to compensate for these deficiencies, unlike middle-class and wealthier Muslims, who, despite however bad the quality of schooling is that their children attend, are able to compensate somewhat for these deficiencies. These children have little by way of academic and career guidance, which leads them to making suboptimal educational and career choices, which consequently limits their social mobility. So in order to compensate for this limited social and cultural capital, as well as financial capital, civil society and Muslim groups have two critical roles: advocacy with government and implementing community initiatives on behalf of all three groups of disadvantaged Muslims. Why is the advocacy with government critical? Because, as I said, it's only government which has all the resources that are capable. But we all know that even if Muslims were targeted in government schemes, regardless of whether they're Muslims or not, many schemes do not get implemented properly. That's the experience of most of us. Advocacy must suggest what needs to be done, the finances and human resources required, monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of these schemes. This involves various ways in which we lessen the cost of schooling and increase the quality of learning. In formulating any scheme for Muslims, we require data. And for this, there are tremendous gaps, and I won't say tremendous, there are significant gaps in the data for Muslims. We do not have data on enrollment and other aspects for Muslims, whereas we have the same data for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And strangest of all, NCERT has not released any data on the learning of Muslims, though they have been doing it in the past for both scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and even OBCs. Without this kind of data, it is difficult to formulate schemes. So this is one aspect of advocacy. The second type of activity that civil society groups should be involved in, and Muslim groups, is to provide community inputs which can provide a variety of inputs. And I'm only suggesting a few just as examples. Parenting classes for parents of infants, community support classes for students, English classes for students and youth, continuing education and skill enhancing opportunities for youth, and academic and career guidance for students and youth. The overall issues confronting Muslims are tremendous, and the educationalist challenge is enormous in size and complexity. As I've said before, this school-going age, under 25, school-going age and the under 25 years is 80 million people. And it is important to understand that many of the solutions can only be region-specific. For Uttar Pradesh is a very different situation than Kerala. For most of the districts in Uttar Pradesh, the enrollment of Muslims is hugely low. Given that the three groups of disadvantaged Muslims, what do we need to do? On top of everything else, we are now faced with a pandemic which will affect all disadvantaged groups, especially their access, their retention, and their learning. And this will be especially the case with girls. This is particularly a bad situation for Muslim girls, because Muslim girls, in fact, have done very well in the last last few decades, in fact, their enrollment is better than the enrollment of Muslim boys. This will become a surprise to many, because for decades ago, the whole debate was around the orthodox conservative Muslim parents who did not send their girls to school. Now the issue really is, we now know that Muslim parents are quite keen to send their girls to school. The issue now for Muslim girls is very different. The issue now should be of a repurposing of education and convincing parents that education should also be related to Muslim girls getting into new occupations rather than being good mothers and staying at home only. Finally, I would like to state that we now need a kind of a new compact between Muslim organizations, civil society, to explore different ways in which we can come together to discuss this issue. And for this, we need to articulate the development in education landscape for Muslims at the state and district and sub-district level. This cannot be underestimated. And to take Maulana's vision of an education for all and respecting the rights of every citizen to an education, I would end my talk with the phrase carpe diem, which means seize the day, and a quote from Shakespeare. I think it's in Julius Caesar. Shakespeare says, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyages of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures." Thank you.